Fantasy football playoff sleepers. We're talking about potential league-winning sleepers, players who are a little bit under the radar, but can turn into league winners.
What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Theo Gremminger, Fantasy Football Daily on the Fantasy Points Podcast Network. Joined today by Ryan Heath. It's been a little too long for Ryan. Ryan's a frequent guest on Fantasy Football Daily, and he's also a frequent guest on Dynasty Life. Haven't podcasted in a little bit here. Ryan, we're going to break it down. And it's funny because we had this kind of conversation. It's never clean. It's never how you think it's going to go. It's never a player finishes as the running back 1 overall, the wide receiver 1 overall, and then they just finish top 3 in scoring every single week in the fantasy playoffs. It feels like every single year there's a new hero that presents themselves. And we can even go back to last year. Last year was Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor had this unbelievable end of season and playoff run after sort of a slow start to the season. And it's really kind of, we should have seen the writing on the wall with Taylor heading into this season based on how he finished last year. But anybody who had Jonathan Taylor rostered in like week 8 of last season didn't necessarily feel like they were sitting on some sort of a league winner, and a lot of Taylor teams ended up cashing in. We can also remember sometimes week 16 is a huge week for fantasy managers where, you know, week 17 matters a lot, but also week 16. Go 2 years back on this one, Ryan. The player that knocked out so many teams in Underdog Best Ball Mania was Amari Cooper. If you didn't have Amari Cooper, you were sort of done. Amari had that monster game. So we're looking at players today. We're not talking about guys who are on the waiver wire, but we're talking about players who are probably in your fantasy lineup, but have an opportunity to end the season in a better light than maybe we're looking at for them heading into week 12. And we got to start off the top here. A player that the two of us discussed a lot this summer, Jameson Williams. And it looked like the Jameson Williams faders, doubters, and haters were in a great spot to start the year, Ryan. Really, really slow start. But now we're seeing Jameson Williams take off. He's had near 20% target share in back-to-back games with Dan Campbell calling them. And the targets have condensed with Sam Laporta on the injured reserve. Your thoughts on Jameson Williams? Just how pure can he run for the rest of the year?
Yeah, so I'll say this on Jameson Williams. I do think that Dan Campbell calling plays over the past 2 games has had a bit of a positive impact. The Laporta injury, of course, going to have a bit of a positive impact. His usage is much better than it was earlier in the season. So like over the first 9 games, he was at 8.4 expected fantasy points per game. He's up to 11.5 over the past 2 weeks. As you said, just under a 20% target share now. I have 18.1%. And interestingly, his horizontally breaking route rate has spiked from 37% up to almost 45%. For those unaware, horizontally breaking routes are generally the better types of routes for fantasy. They lead to higher target rates, all of that. It's not like you're just run and go routes, clear routes like down the field. These are routes that can actually lead to targets. So all of that stuff is really good for Jameson Williams, and he's capitalized on it. I mean, over 100 receiving yards per game over the last 2 games, nearly 22 fantasy points per game. So all of that's awesome. I do think that most likely what we're getting from Jameson Williams over the rest of the season is something kind of similar to what he did last year, which is he's not going to be like near the top of the league in usage and pure target volume, any of that, but he's going to have these spike weeks where he is very efficient on like kind of wide receiver 3-ish volume, but he can probably average out to a top 18 receiver. And yeah, with lots of spike weeks and probably a few duds in there along the way, because that's just who Jameson Williams is, right? So in the context of this like 6-week run we have ahead of us, that's kind of exciting because the Lions have a top 5 schedule for opposing wide receivers by schedule adjusted fantasy points per game allowed. They've got an awesome matchup against the Giants this week. They get Dallas, the Rams, and the Steelers in weeks 14 through 16. Like, that's a huge stretch of matchups where JMO can absolutely pop off and win you a week and single-handedly advance you. So yeah, I think people are right to be pretty excited. I will also say, though, Amon-Ra St. Brown, if you can buy low at all on him, I would just immediately do that. If people think that Jameson Williams is taking over, that's not what I'm seeing in the usage numbers at all. He was still at 19 expected fantasy points last week. Yes, his connection with Jared Goff was awful. He was like a 40% catchable target rate. He dropped 3 of them. Like, none of that was good, but the schedule is just as good for St. Brown. He still is up at an elite first read target share. He's also going to score a lot of fantasy points over this stretch. So yeah, don't forget about Amon-Ra is all I would add.
Yeah, I love the point on Amon-Ra. And Amon-Ra, I think, is under the radar as a player that could be the wide receiver 1 rest of the way. I know that the last 2 weeks, not necessarily what you wanted to see. If you're an Amon-Ra manager, you get a little worried when the wide receiver 2 is producing. But it's an offense that we didn't really talk about the contingent upside for the receivers that much this past offseason. We did a little bit in the context of Isaac Tesla, but that really never came into fruition. We've talked about it with the running backs a lot. Certainly if David Montgomery were to go down, Jahmyr Gibbs to the absolute stratosphere. And on the flip side, if Jahmyr Gibbs were to miss time, Montgomery would see an absolute boost. But really, Laporta was a featured weapon. The numbers were not massive for Laporta, but it's not like the tight end 2 is a replacement level player. I mean, you're talking about backups for Detroit that are significant downgrade from Laporta, and it changes the offense. I think with Laporta not there, both of these wide receivers can eat. And we'll say that sometimes the past repeats itself. Anyone who had Jameson Williams last year, we got to enjoy that huge week. I believe that this was a week 16. Yeah, week 16. We had Jameson Williams go off for 5 catches for 143 yards and a touchdown. Helped you get to the fantasy football championship game if you used him that week. Maybe we could see history sort of repeating itself. Agreed with you on the Lions. Complete wheels up. Another player who's looking to turn the corner here, and this is why we really shouldn't see too many, and people do it, Ryan. It's like a lot of people victory lap everything in fantasy. They victory lap the week. It's a victory lap type sport because a guy scores a bunch of points, you liked him, and you feel vindicated. A guy you faded ends up getting off to a slow start. You want to say, look how smart I am. It's natural for the fantasy manager out there. One player that we took a lot of heat for, and this is throughout the year, and I'm saying we in like the royal sense here because you, Graham Barfield, Scott Barrett, myself, a ton of us at Fantasy Points really liked Kenneth Walker sort of at ADP cost, talking about end of round 3, mostly round 4. He was a guy that both of us were enthusiastic about. We love the Clint Kubiak effect for him. And it really has been a very, very rough season for him. Obviously, the Zach Charbonnet touchdowns hurt. Walker's just not had that sort of impact that we thought. And he's not so bad that you'd had to like bench him. So it's almost been even more painful, Ryan, where you'd have the glimmer of hope effect, where sometimes you'd play a guy and you'd say, well, he's still got a role here. And you end up getting a 10-point week. But it looks like things are finally turning the corner for Kenneth Walker. Had a big play called back last week and scored the touchdown. What are you seeing in the data and the analytics with Walker post-bye week?
Yeah, we have just seen a shift over the past 3 weeks, and we've been tracking this in the Everything Report every single week since then. And yeah, we've just seen the Seahawks start to use Ken Walker at the goal line a lot more is the main thing that's changed. Also, over these last 3 weeks, he has played more snaps and run more routes than Zach Charbonnet in every single one of these past 3 games. That hadn't really been the case since much earlier in the season. So that is at least somewhat encouraging. The goal line work has totally shifted. He has 4 of the team's 5 carries inside the 5 since the bye, compared to just 1 of 10 in pre-bye games with Zach Charbonnet. So all that's awesome. He is now up to 12.5 expected fantasy points per game post-bye. That's the RB24, so kind of been a low-end RB2-ish on average by usage. But I do think it can get even better. We heard Mike McDonald saying after this past week that it looks like Walker has earned more opportunities and that they're very happy with him. So probably rest of season, I'm still ranking Walker as somewhat of like a mid-range back half RB2, but I do think specifically this week we could see a big blow up and potentially that rolls forward into future weeks. But yeah, they get the Titans this week as I think it's 13.5-point favorites, just set season highs in XFP and fantasy points. Like he's just like a top 14 option pretty easily to me this week. It's a top 5 matchup on the ground. So I do think you could see a huge game out of Walker this week.
I'll say that I was pretty enthusiastic about the schedule just because of the vibes with it, Ryan, where it's not totally clean. Like a lot of times we look at strength of schedule, it's going to factor in the entire season, but then you take sort of the bird's eye approach and you say, which one of these games could really, really tilt over? You have the Colts in week 15. That's a really interesting one for fantasy because it's Indianapolis on the road in Seattle. We know the firepower with Indianapolis. That game could tilt over. Then you get the Rams in week 16. We just saw these two teams play like a 21-19, 4 interception Sam Darnold game. That game's going to be in Seattle, though. So that's a game where I'm sort of cautiously optimistic that the teams are going to pick up the scoring pace just by not turning the ball over. And Ryan, we just saw Ken Walker have some success against this defense. And it's almost like they were funneling, both teams sort of seem to be funneling things towards, the non-star players. Like we saw the Kyron Williams have a really big game, and we saw AJ Barner have a really big game. And then gotta like that week 17 matchup against Carolina. It's not like a prohibitive one from Walker putting up some numbers. So I'm kind of optimistic. I mean, I know Walker's burned us in the past, but it feels like it. And you say low end RB2, and I think that's the way to approach it. But with his home run hitting ability, I'll take it. If I just get the touch volume with Walker, he's got that burst and athleticism where eventually it's going to be a 40-yard touchdown if he keeps getting this sort of touches and sort of flip things. So I'm pretty optimistic about him.
No, I mean, those are all really great points. Yeah, while on paper, none of those matchups are amazing, I'm with you in that this could become kind of Seattle's identity a little bit more, especially as teams kind of figure out, as the Rams did, that like you just have to make them run on you or they will completely kill you in the deep passing game with JSN if you're going to play base defense against all of their heavy personnel. So yeah, that could open things up for the run game in general and for Walker down the stretch. So no, I'm totally with you. Like he is a player that can bust open a game by himself at any given moment. So yeah, I am with you in that I'm way happier to have him on a bunch of rosters right now than I was a month ago.
100%. Things change in fantasy football. Jameson Williams and Kenneth Walker, the redemption arc for the end of the season is going to hit really, really hard. Ryan, the fantasy points audience knows the stuff you're dropping over here. They know dynasty points. Why don't you talk about the show you're dropping with Jacob Gibbs every week?
Yeah, so over on the CBS Beyond the Box Score podcast feed and YouTube channel, Jacob Gibbs and I do a show every week called Mastering Matchups, where two of the biggest nerds in all of fantasy football kind of put our heads together and just talk about every matchup angle that we see for the upcoming slate of games. We go over some start-sit decisions that people might be having trouble with. We go over a little bit of DFS strategy, just kind of a little bit of everything. Just it's like a really good primer for the upcoming week to make all of your fantasy decisions. So yeah, Mastering Matchups with Ryan Heath and Jacob Gibbs. Yeah, it's a really fun show. We also do it live every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern time over on the CBS YouTube channel. So definitely check that out.
Yeah, highly recommend that show. It's been absolute fire this season. Big shout out to Jacob, definitely a friend of the program, to steal a college term. Uses our fantasy points data and uses it extremely, extremely well. Great guest every time he's been on any of my shows. Let's talk about Nico Collins. This is a player that you were very enthusiastic about. I remember the two of us having like BTJ versus Nico Collins versus like Malik Neighbors arguments in like the good old days of August. Now we're at a point where Nico Collins, you could sort of say that this is another one, Ryan, where it was a big source of frustration for many, many weeks. The pure anger and rage towards Nick Caley that we all experienced if we drafted Nico Collins. That's sort of gone away the last few weeks. It's been a ton of positivity in the target volume. We've seen that for 4 straight games, and we've seen 3 straight games where Nico Collins has just dominated. And if you're listening to this podcast after Thursday, we're recording this on Monday, so we're not sure how it's going to work out this Thursday evening, but Collins has been on an absolute tear. Your thoughts on him? What does the rest of the season look like for him moving forward?
Yeah, I think you have to be encouraged. So it's like very easy to say, oh, okay, like Davis Mills is doing the same thing for Nico Collins that Mac Jones did for Brian Thomas once upon a time. I understand that impulse, but I think probably the bigger thing here is the Texans have just realized, okay, we can air the ball out because we have Nico Collins. Like that is a viable path to our offense instead of just running it up the gut 20 times a game with Woody Marks and Nick Chubb, which has not been a particularly effective strategy. So yeah, we've seen Davis Mills averaging 253 catchable air yards per start. That is up from CJ Stroud's 141. That Mills would lead the NFL in that stat right now, I believe. So it really is just a pass volume thing. Yeah, Mills is locking on to Collins. That's great. Stroud can do the same thing once he's back. So yeah, I do feel a little bit better about, or I shouldn't even say a little bit. I feel quite a bit better about Nico Collins for the rest of the season. I think he is a top 12 weekly wide receiver from here on out. And yeah, the volume's just been great. 12.5 targets per game over the last 2. Yeah, it's just been pretty awesome. So I like Nico quite a bit rest of season. The schedule, again, is also not like perfectly amazing. We do get the Indianapolis game coming up soon here. So that's kind of fun. But yeah, nothing that super pops from that perspective, but yeah, I think it's really just the team is playing differently, and that's at least good for fantasy.
Yeah, and I think it's an overwhelming like push by the team, and you can tell that their emphasis is Nico Collins is the offensive focal point. It's completely clear. So a lot of times when we have alpha wide receivers like him, and it's a team that doesn't have a whole lot of target competition, or in this case, touch competition, he can just be the player that they completely lean on, and we could see him have like a random 15 target game here, and the expectation he's going to be north of 10 targets every week. I'll even take sort of some not so great targets for a player that's this physical, that has this big of a catch radius. Just get the ball to Nico Collins and let him go to work. I think he's a wide receiver 1 for the rest of the way, and potential that he could be a top 5 scorer at the wide receiver position for the rest of the way. Ryan, one player that I had for back-to-back weeks in my waiver wire column at Fantasy Points, and you can get access to all of Ryan's work, all of my work, all of our rankings over at fantasypoints.com. Use the code Theo and get a 15% discount of any of our already discounted packages if you're looking for an edge to help you in the fantasy playoffs. But one player who I just can't stop. I had him as a top 3 waiver wire ad for consecutive weeks here. Done really nothing. Luther Burden for the Chicago Bears. But Ryan, we did get a little bit of a breakthrough in usage. 5. I've never been this excited to see a player get 5 targets on my bench than Burden. It feels like a ramp-up's coming where we're going to get to like week 15 and every single article is going to say play Luther Burden in the flex. I just got this feeling. Talk me into this one.
Yeah, so I mean, we've been waiting for this all season. Scott Barrett and I, probably no other player have we watched closer in the everything report, like compared to how little he's actually been on the field, how much he's actually done, than Luther Burden. But yeah, this week finally ran more routes than Olamide Zaccheaus, up to a 61% route share, a season high. Zaccheaus barely playing, only 1 fewer target than Rome Odunze. So that's great. Like he's a part of the offense now. We've gotten there. And he could definitely take off. Like this is a really talented player. We have talked ad nauseum about the whole Ben Johnson slot cheat code. We saw what Amon-Ra St. Brown did. as a rookie after he became a full-time player kind of later in the season. So that is like the ultimate upside for Luther Burden. I don't know if we get to quite that on this Bears offense. It's a little bit more spread out. There is an actual target earner here in Rome Odunze. They have leaned into the run when possible and been somewhat successful in doing so. So they're like middle of the pack in all of the kind of fantasy friendliness, passing metrics, just passing yards per game, catchable air yards per game, all of that. But Burden can definitely have some spike weeks. He's a really dynamic player. He's top 10 in yards per out run right now among all qualifying wide receivers. That's pretty impressive for any rookie, even in a part-time role. So yeah, he's just a guy that when he has the ball in his hands, you can kind of see the dynamism, you can see the explosiveness. So yeah, I am totally with you. Very excited to have Luther Burden on any teams that I still have him on. And yeah, it looks like you might get rewarded for holding all season.
Is there anything you're looking for this week? A lot of people were going to say, we want to see more catches. We want to see more targets. For you, is the breakthrough for Burden going to be snap share? Is it going to be target share? Like, what's a metric that's going to be a big signal for you in week 12 that, hey, maybe we can put him in our lineups in week 13 or week 14?
I mean, I think he's kind of already close to where we want him in terms of snap, route, share. It would be awesome if he led the team in targets. I don't think he needs to, though. I think really what I want to see is he's already in the full-time role. If he can just make a big play or two in this current full-time role and kind of roll that forward into, okay, this is a successful way that Ben Johnson sees to run his offense, and maybe that's what we pivot to the rest of the season. I think that's mainly what I would be looking for. Like if he did the same thing, ran like 65% of the routes, had like 4 or 5 targets, but he had like a long, like 50-yard touchdown or something, I would be okay. It's just wheels up for Burden. Like the usage numbers will probably come up and follow the production in that case. If he can kind of break a big play.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. We'll see how it goes this week. But again, this is exactly the kind of player you want on your fantasy bench this time of year. And a lot of times we see rookies really ramp up over like the last quarter of the season. Those last 5 games can be really fantasy friendly for some of these rookie wide receivers. Chicago's also got a lot to play for. I think getting Luther Burden and Colston Loveland sort of ramped up heading into the NFL playoffs. Chicago looks like a team that's going to be in the playoffs, or at least very much in contention down to the wire. You're going to want to have those players who used very high draft picks giving you the ability to have a big spike week in the actual NFL playoffs. Chicago's going to be a significant underdog. If they can win a game in the playoffs in Ben Johnson's first season, that's going to be a massive win. It's going to be a win for him simply making the playoffs. So done a very good job in that turnaround in Chicago. Ryan, one player who I've talked about with Scott Barrett, anybody who's watched the School of Scott or listened to it over the last couple of weeks, we've talked about Derrick Henry. Our enthusiasm is growing and growing. And Ryan, it seems like an annual tradition for me. If I have a contending dynasty team, I end up pulling off a trade or two for the big dog. It's an annual tradition because the player he gets older and older, and then he still scores like an absolute demon when he gets to the fantasy playoffs end of the season. But the schedule is ridiculously good this season.
Yeah, no, it's literally perfect. And honestly, Scott Barrett and I were talking about this all the way back when the NFL schedule released in like May or June or whenever that was, that, wow, it looks like the Derrick Henry fantasy playoff run is just predetermined, set up. And that's, I think, exactly what we're about to get. So he's coming off his best fantasy performance of the season, 5.7 yards per carry, over 20 fantasy points against the Browns, which are a very difficult run defense. They were the single toughest schedule adjusted matchup for opposing running backs. We see Henry just be very efficient, score a bunch of fantasy points against them. And that's just so encouraging because, the schedule only gets easier from here. He, by schedule adjusted, he has the easiest remaining schedule of any RB in the league. The Ravens are very heavy favorites in 5 of their next 7 games, including 2 against the Cincinnati Bengals, who we have seen get completely roasted by all sorts of totally random running backs this year. I have been writing Henry up every single week in the Everything Report for the last month, basically, and saying you need to go trade for him right now because the stretch run could be amazing. He could very easily score as a top 5 running back over that span. Historically, his efficiency just literally comes up as the year goes on. By December and January, he's averaging 5 to 6 yards per carry every single year, starting just above 4 in September. Like, it gradually comes up. So yeah, Derrick Henry is like the easiest buy in all of fantasy right now. I think although he just had a good game, I think he's still kind of looked at maybe as more of like a low end RB1 based on what he's done over the full season. But yeah, I think he can absolutely outperform that the rest of the year and really be like a fantasy playoff hammer.
Yeah, and when you look at the schedule this week against the Jets, Ravens are a big favorite. They should absolutely steamroll. You got Tyrod Taylor in his first start. That could be a massive Derrick Henry week. Then we have the Bengals on Thanksgiving Day. That is, I mean, it doesn't need much context. Pittsburgh in Baltimore the following week, and then the Bengals again. And then, Ryan, when we get to the fantasy playoffs, it's an interesting schedule because you've got for week 16 and week 17, New England coming into Baltimore. That's a massive game for Baltimore, and also with the pressure that New England's offense is going to put on Lamar Jackson and the Ravens, you could end up seeing that being a big Henry game. The game that is like under the radar, though, it's a tough Week 17 matchup on paper because Green Bay's been very good against the run this year, but you could just see it where it's Week 17, it's Baltimore, it's cold in Green Bay, and Derrick Henry finds the end zone like twice. You can just sort of see it. It's sort of a vibes-based take by myself. But Henry's interesting. And then just sort of like, not to get too off schedule here, we got a number of players we got to talk about, but how do we see Derrick Henry's 2026 shaping up? I think a lot of like people, when I say buy Derrick Henry in Dynasty, they'll say, look, and this is square. I don't want this old guy. But when you look at Henry, can't you see him kind of transitioning into a LeGarrette Blount, New England, Jamal Williams, peak Detroit role, where there's another back being mixed in, but Henry gets the goal line work and is like this unbelievable hammer and still gives you like 10 touchdowns, 12 touchdown runs. Like, I don't think that the 2026 outlook for him, short of Baltimore drafting like Jeremiah Love, is going to be that much different than this year. They signed him for a 2-year deal for a reason.
Yeah, no, I would tend to agree. I try to, especially with these like elite talents in Dynasty, I just try to go like kind of season to season with them. I'm not going to feel all that differently about Henry in redraft or in Dynasty this offseason than I did last offseason, which is just, yeah, there's zero value insulation, but like it can be like a low-end RB1 that you can acquire for much cheaper than that. So yeah, I don't think he's necessarily like cooked this offseason. He's signed with guaranteed money in 2026. He's signed technically through 2027. So yeah, I mean, I think he is in their plans, and that, yeah, at the very least, he's going to continue getting the ball at the goal line. So yeah, that's all you should really need.
Yeah, and if you're out of it this season in fantasy, but you want to use Derrick Henry, and how can I benefit off of Derrick Henry's big schedule, all the enthusiasm that Theo and Ryan have for him, consider playing DFS. You can use Henry this week in DFS. If you want to stack the game, you can use Tyrod Taylor for super cheap. And today's podcast is sponsored by Fantasy Points Premium, which includes all of our betting and DFS content, the best source of DFS projections and rankings in the business over at Fantasy Points. And we've been on an absolute heater in terms of our prop bets we've been giving out. We started giving out recommended anytime touchdown bets back in week 6. And since then, we're up 30 units in just over 6 weeks. So if you're a $100 bettor like Ryan is, you'd be up $2,960 right now. And over a larger sample size, Justin Varnes, who puts out a number of these prop bets, is up 103 units with a 65% hit rate over the last 3 years. You can get a Fantasy Points Premium sub right now for $87.50, not per week. That's for the rest of the year. And again, use the code Theo and get 15% off of that. check out Fantasy Points Premium over at fantasypoints.com. Ryan, let's keep this thing going. A couple other players to talk about. Let's talk about TreVeyon Henderson because you're a Patriots guy. So I want to get your vibes on this one. Like, everybody listening to this, like, they don't need to hear about TreVeyon Henderson. He's been absolutely unbelievable the last 2 weeks. But I want to get your opinion on what way do you think this New England offense looks in terms of the running back touches when Ramondre Stevenson returns from injury. I saw an interview with Mike Vrabel this week where the guy is just like so like it's like a curmudgeon, like not like hyped at all. They're asking him about TreVeyon Henderson, and he's like, "Yeah, he got in the end zone, which was important for us. Would like to see a little bit more in like his role as a blocker. Like, can't ever be like, oh, this guy was unbelievable for us. He's on such a tear. We're so excited about him." You could think of so many NFL head coaches that would give a much more positive interview after the last two performances TreVeyon had. I don't know if this is a motivation tactic. I don't know if this is just Vrabel. Your thoughts on the situation, though? Put TreVeyon Henderson managers at ease here, Ryan, or don't. But what are your vibes with this situation?
I think it probably is a motivation tactic because I will say TreVeyon Henderson's pass blocking has been pretty impeccable over the last few weeks. Like, it kind of funny how that works. Like a rookie early in his rookie season has a few issues like with blitz pickups and like the finer points of the game. But yeah, as he settles in, as they actually allow him to play like close to a full-time snap share and get into a rhythm, he looks better on the ground and he looks better in pass pro. And that's per me, that's per Brett Whitefield, that's per pretty much every industry source. So yeah, I don't know what Vrabel's deal is. I would assume it's a motivation thing. I don't want to speculate further on that. My fellow Patriots fans get very annoyed at me when I nitpick Mike Vrabel. But yeah.
Oh no, Vrabel's the man. Vrabel's the man. But Vrabel is also a little bit of a history here of slow playing elite talent at the running back position. We saw the Dion Lewis year with where before Derrick Henry was fully unlocked back in the day. I think it's TreVeyon Henderson's season. TreVeyon Henderson to the moon. Ryan, I think he's a top 18 pick next year in redraft, the way that he's trending up at this point now as well. So, yeah, don't want to pour any cold water on that situation, but I wish Vrabel would give some sort of an interview where he's like, oh, this guy's awesome. It would just make us feel a little bit better about things. Let's talk about Jaylen Waddle. Miami's on their bye week this week. Everybody's talking about Devon Achane. Certainly everybody knows the two of us were all over Achane this past summer, and we don't really need to dive into too much with Achane. Achane looks like a league winner. But Jaylen Waddle looks like a player that when he comes back from their bye, he can be viewed as sort of a wide receiver one. And I don't know if the market is fully there on that, but the usage is just outstanding.
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying this essentially since Tyreek Hill went down. Waddle has just had like wide receiver one level volume, at least from a target share perspective. But yeah, back-to-back season highs in target share these past 2 weeks, 33%, 35%. He's ninth in receiving yards per game since Tyreek went down. All those numbers get even a little bit better if you just throw out that one bad weather game against the Browns where there was kind of no passing production at all on that day. So yeah, I view Waddle as like a fringe top 12 wide receiver. And as you've kind of hinted at, the schedule is amazing for Miami over the rest of the season, and especially in the fantasy playoffs. I mean, they get the Steelers, one of the biggest pass funnels in the NFL, in week 15. They get the Bengals. That's a potential shootout in Miami. And they get the Buccaneers in Miami for fantasy championship week. Another potential shootout. So yeah, what's nice is they mostly stay away from like these cold weather games outside of just the Pittsburgh one, essentially, for the rest of the year. So yeah, I think the Dolphins, it's crazy that we're here a little bit with what the vibes have been at different points in the season, but yeah, coming off like some wins, a little bit of momentum with this team. Like I don't really see them kind of quitting down the stretch. Jaylen Waddle, Devon Achane, Tua Tagovailoa, Mike McDaniel, all these guys are playing for future jobs and contracts in the league. So yeah, I do think we could see them kind of keep their foot on the gas and just be awesome for fantasy over the rest of the year. So yeah, Achane is like easily a top 3 running back to me for the rest of the season. Waddle, yeah, right around that top 12, top 14 at the wide receiver position.
let's put a little context to this Jaylen Waddle one, because I know there's a lot of fantasy managers out there that are still able to make trades. A lot of the trade deadlines are like right now, Ryan, and I think it's some trade deadlines are right before Thanksgiving, so maybe you get through Sunday's games. Would you take Jaylen Waddle or Emeka Egbuka for the rest of the season?
Oh, that's very, very tough. I will lean Emeka Egbuka, but like I don't feel great about that. I mean, the Buccaneers have like an equally kind of interesting schedule. It's not like as amazing on paper, but there are definitely like some potential shootouts in there. Egbuka getting healthier, Baker Mayfield hopefully getting healthier. I do think we could get back to kind of what we were seeing earlier in the season with that efficiency. But I wouldn't blame anyone for taking Waddle.
And what about, I'll give you one more, who's a guy who's been running pure on the touchdown department recently, T. Higgins or Jaylen Waddle?
Ooh, yeah, that one is also a little bit spicy.
I was trying to give you answers where I thought you were going to be like, oh, it's Jaylen Waddle for sure. I didn't mean to, cause you any concern here. I think they're pretty close. Yeah. I might go Waddle there. The schedule down the stretch looks good. And again, the consolidation of the offense where Cincinnati, you have Jamar Chase. You also have Chase Brown, who's going to get a ton of touches. Miami, it's really Devon Achane only. So obviously the pie is smaller, but the touch volume and the target volume for Waddle is going to be there. So I might go Waddle on that one. But that's sort of where we're at. I think, when you look at guys like Michael Pittman, Devonta Smith, Stephon Diggs, I'm Waddle over them.
Agreed.
So that's sort of where we're at. We're at Waddle as sort of the high-end wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 1 type range. Again, the bye week is a little bit tricky this week, but after that, it's wheels up. Let's talk about a couple of these running backs. Is it Bhayshul Tuten time in Jacksonville? Really played well this past week. Sort of had his breakout performance.
Yeah, man, I hope so. I think it is health permitting. So we don't really know that much about this ankle injury that he sustained at the end of this game. It sounded like he could have gone back in if the score wasn't lopsided. That was what he said to the media afterward. But I mean, we'll see when the practice reports come out, which we're recording this podcast before. But yeah, like after the game, we get Liam Cohen saying that Tuten's been practicing better and better, and that the more they get him involved, the better their offense is. Like that's very exciting. The Jaguars have kind of made this commitment to the ground game. So even if like Tuten and Etienne are both getting work, there's enough room where if Tuten does push to like a 60% opportunity share, which is not far off of where he was last week, then that's like a useful fantasy player that you can play at the very least in your flex, maybe in as like a low end RB2. But yeah, I mean, until he left the game with injury, Tuten outcarried Etienne 15-12, outgained him on the ground 74-47, only 4 fewer snaps up to that point that he was forced out. He was used at the goal line, not as much as Etienne, but he did score on his 1 goal line touch and looked freaking awesome on it. So I was calling Tuten like the clear top waiver ad this week over Rashawn Tucker, over an Emanuel Wilson, just because I think he has the best chance of all of those running backs, kind of regardless of the incumbent starter status, to just take over the backfield and to be the lead back over the rest of the season. I do think that's very much in play, again, health permitting. So yeah, kind of an interesting week on the waiver wire where there's like all these different directions you can go. But yeah, I am riding with Tuten. I have him on every single roster, as people might not be surprised about based on my preseason and earlier season takes. So yeah, I do think that we could be seeing it. Tuten could be like a useful piece down the stretch here.
Yeah, and Jacob Gibbs, who you podcast with, might be the biggest Tuten stan out there. So you've definitely been influenced as well, Ryan. It's like a little Stockholm syndrome for both of you guys. But I'm there, and I also think that even if it's not a full takeover, Tuten can end up being a flex play, even with Etienne still getting a lot of touches. It's a very running back centric offense. BTJ, that's a whole show. We're not really expecting a whole. I'm at least not expecting a lot from BTJ in the fantasy playoffs. Parker Washington, sort of a capped out volume type guy. You're going to get what you can out of him. Jacoby Myers ramping up a little bit, but again, not a player we'd expect to have spike weeks. Jacksonville is going to have to lean on their running backs like they did this past week, and I think that they have a blueprint for it. They played great against LA. They killed the Chargers. Why would they get away from that? So I think Etienne and Tuten you're really should be bullish on both of them. I also said if Tuten is in fact banged up, LaQuint Allen is the kind of player that I'd want to stash on my bench just because we've seen the value of the running back position in this offense multiple times over this year. Tucker, I had him as a top 5 waiver wire addition last week. He smashed. That was nice. I think that he's going to hold on to a role. And Emanuel Wilson, I mean, I think Tucker could hold on to, let's say, a fun role, a flex-worthy, maybe RB2 role, even with Bucky Irving. Emanuel Wilson, it's pretty simple. Any week Josh Jacobs is out, he goes right in your fantasy lineup. I think he's interesting for DFS this week. Want to pick your brain before we get out of here, Ryan, on the Atlanta situation. Just how much of an adjustment should we expect with Kirk Cousins behind center and now Drake London set to miss with a PCL injury?
I think quite a large adjustment. So I led the Everything report off with this, just kind of a full breakdown of the offense. So anyone interested in extended thoughts can go and just read that. But yeah, we have first with London, he was scoring as like a top 4 wide receiver. Like so far, I am so upset that this is how it had to happen, but he's out at least a week with a PCL sprain. And Penix obviously likely out for the rest of the season, had some ACL damage. So this is a big downgrade just to the offense in general. We had seen Atlanta since the bye in Penix's games actually go very pass heavy for the first time. They were at a plus 3% pass rate over expectation, basically top 12 team in terms of pass rate. They'd been one of the most run heavy teams in the league up to that point. And we saw it create like this explosion of production for London that I just don't think is going to be there whenever he comes back to this Kirk Cousins offense. The stat I had was that across 13 drives with Kirk Cousins this season, so a few last week and then the Dolphins game that Penix missed, the Falcons have only gotten into the red zone on 2 of 13 Kirk Cousins drives this year. It's been really rough sailing, and again, remember, so much of that was against the Miami freaking Dolphins. Like you can't move the ball against that defense. Are you serious? So I expect less passing. I expect fewer red zone trips. And Cousins just targeted London relatively less than we have seen Penix doing. If you just go back and look to last season, it was like a 20% target share for Darnell Mooney, just under 25% for Drake London. So I think at best, when London's coming back, you should expect like borderline top 12 production at most. And that's like if all the injury stuff kind of works out and he returns like fully healthy as the like best version of himself. So yeah, it's kind of rough. I would be trying to pivot off of London in redraft this week. I'd be trying to do the same thing with Bijan Robinson. Kind of like the biggest thing of his season this year has been the absurd target share that he's commanded, 17%. He has about 23% of the team's receiving yards, which is the second best mark in fantasy points data history. And it's the same thing. Like with Cousins, he just doesn't hyper target his running backs as often, or at least that's not what we saw last season. And yeah, just with the downgrade to the offense overall, with Robinson not at all having the goal line work guaranteed, only 5 carries inside the 5-yard line on the season, I also think he's more of a low-end RB1 the rest of the way. And I do think that right now is probably your chance to pivot off of either of these guys. You can give a few of your pivots potentially, but off of Bijan, I would much rather just have Devon Achane or Jahmyr Gibbs, and I think that is a trade that just gets done in a lot of leagues if you just send that offer blind. So that's what I would be doing with Bijan, is trying to pivot to one of those two. London maybe a little bit trickier. I don't know if you have some ideas. In Dynasty, we discussed pivoting to Rashee Rice, but yeah.
London's a really interesting one in Dynasty because he's so insulated, he's so locked in. He's been unbelievable the last few weeks. He's been a wide receiver 1 overall. I wish we had a little more clarity on when he's going to be back from the injury. PCLs can be tricky, though. This is like what we saw with Brock Bowers earlier this season. So there's a chance he comes back on a little bit of a diminished rate. I also worry about re-aggravation of the injury. It's tricky. It's really tricky for London. I think that in your dynasty leagues, it takes a little bit of context. Some of those players who are those like 26-year-old wide receivers, can you potentially get some sort of a trade done with a non-contending manager that has like a CeeDee Lamb, that has a Justin Jefferson? I think those sort of pivots out there. I think also the Rashee Rice pivot, where it's Rashee Rice plus, where Rice is not necessarily looked at as like a premium dynasty asset by a lot of fantasy managers, even though the scoring looks like it's going to be very strong for the next 2 seasons. It's just really hard to part with London. The London one is much trickier. The Bijan one, just from a redraft context, I agree with you. I think this is Bijan's coming off of this. The timing couldn't have been better. Bijan has one of his better games easily his best game of the last month. It's been sort of really kind of choppy scoring the 3 previous games. Had a 17-point week bracketed by like a 6-point week and a 10-point week. Now he gives you the 30-plus point week. If I can trade Bijan Robinson for Devon Achane, I'm probably doing it. If I can trade Bijan Robinson for Jahmyr Gibbs, I'm probably doing it. After that, it's hard to go down further than that. So I think the next thing you can look at is there a scenario where I can trade Bijan and another somewhat good asset to go get myself Jonathan Taylor or Christian McCaffrey? I don't know. Your league might be more open for 2-for-1 trades, but I agree. I think that the market hasn't adjusted until they actually see a full game of Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins might get like shut down this week. He looked really, really bad. So I think how can you profit off of this with Cousins? I think Kyle Pitts is an interesting tight end play. And I think Tyler Algier is actually going to be a player that gets like 10 to 15 touches every game because of the lack of weapons until London comes back. So I don't know, Ryan. It's an absolute mess. It always is this time of year. But hopefully you can go out and acquire some of the players we talked about. And hopefully you have a couple of them on your team ready to rock. Let me know what you have rest of the week, Ryan.
Yeah, rest of the week, as we mentioned earlier in the show, you can catch me on Mastering Matchups with Jacob Gibbs over on Beyond the Box Score. And then I have Advanced Matchups, my article coming out on fantasypoints.com. That is under the Fantasy Points premium subscription that we talked about earlier, where Chris Wecht has just been doing amazing with all of those touchdown bets. So definitely get in on that. And at the same time, yeah, you can read my Advanced Matchups article where I break down all of the coverage shell angles, all of the important like matchup angles for the upcoming DFS slate. So yeah, check that out. That comes out every Friday morning.
Yeah, highly recommend all of Ryan's work. Check out all of his written work and my written work over at fantasypoints.com. Check out Ryan on Dynasty Points podcast right here on Fantasy Points YouTube and on the Dynasty Points podcast feed. Check out School of Scott Barrett and I every single week. Fantasy Football Daily, we're dropping multiple episodes a week. The Start Sit show with Graham Barfield, make sure you're checking that out every week. We've had some really, really strong hits this season. And then Dynasty Life, my Dynasty show, that drops every week as well. Subscribe to it anywhere you get your podcasts. We're everywhere here at Fantasy Points. We're going to help you crush your fantasy playoffs this season.